Good evening to you. And as we're enjoying a rather warm day today before it turns cold again, I want to go back to a memory from many years ago when Vicki and I first got married. I first want to read to you from 1 Kings 19. This is the story of Elijah on Mount Horeb when he is fleeing from Queen Jezebel and terrible times. And in that 19th chapter, it says in verse 11, the Lord said, "Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." And then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire came a gentle whisper, or as the King James put it, my preference, the sound of a still small voice. I was reading online and saw a post by a former classmate at Carson Newman, now university. It was college back when Vicki and I went there, about a formative event that happened in 1974. The night our main building on the campus burned to the ground. Without a doubt, it was the most dramatic thing that happened in our 4 years there. We were newlyweds, just got married in December over the Christmas break. I was 19. Vicki was still 18, about to turn 19. That was surely an indicator of my overconfidence and persuasive talents, particularly when I asked her skeptical father for her hand in marriage and convinced him. So we moved into a little college-owned house just behind the infirmary right off campus next to the Burnett dormitory for girls. The previous semester, I had lived in what was called the new men's dormitory, and one of my friends from my hall named Charlie came running over in the middle of the night and started pounding on our door and yelling that Henderson Hall was on fire. Well, I raised up in bed, and the curtains in our bedroom were glowing an eerie orange color. And so I got up out of bed and threw on some clothes and went to the door and answered it. And suddenly I saw the whole sky lit up with that flame. And Vicki was behind me. We headed out. Now, if you've never been to Carson Newman University, to the campus, Henderson Hall then and now was the center of campus. At that time, it housed a lot of the departments, including religion, philosophy, speech, English, and I'm sure some others that I've forgotten now. So we quickly dressed and went out, and I could smell burning wood and feel the heat from a block and a half away. Glowing sparks were all around us like fireflies, except it was little bits of flame. So we turned the corner and we saw giant flames roaring into the night out of every single window in that building. It had been built in 1916. It was all wood, all beautiful timbers. The floors were old and creaky, and there were banisters everywhere. And whenever we would change classes, I remember the building literally creaked and groaned and squeaked as all of us walked across until we were seated in the classrooms. But now gigantic flames burst out the windows. It was a landscape from hell. And there were rumors everywhere that it had been arson, and later that was confirmed to be the truth. We got as close as we could. Our professors were all around us watching. My Greek professor, Mr. L. Dan Taylor, had spent about 30 years, we were told, working on a single Greek text. And he was looking down at the ground, realizing that his whole lifetime of work was gone. There weren't any PCs in those days, and there were no digital backups, and even copies were difficult to make. And so whatever you had was written down on paper or type. Buddy Sheridan and Ben Philbeck and Dan Champion and others watched their libraries and personal papers and diplomas and lectures turned into ashes. Buddy Sheridan told us he had a letter from Harry Emerson Fosdick, the famous preacher, hanging on his wall. And I remember Bill Blevins watching pensively, and Ben Philbeck, my Old Testament professor, being encouraging to all of us and making jokes and trying to lift the spirits of everyone around him. I was very awed by their being there. So over the next days, we improvised the rest of our semester and we got through. Classes had to be relocated. Professors had to reconstruct their lectures and they had to try to remember grades. Our classes were crammed into whatever room we could find. There was no email then, and there was no way to preserve things. We had to wander around, even find out where the classes were going to be. It was chaotic, but there was a lot of heroism in that time. Crises bring the best and the worst out of people. The burnt wood smell was everywhere for a long time, and only days later did we learn there were 3 fires started inside the building in different places, clearly arson. One of them blew 2 firemen literally through the door and out into the yard when they went in to investigate. There would be speculation about who was responsible through the years, but as far as I know, they never pinned it on anyone, and it's an unsolved crime. Since one day I was going to be an adjunct professor for several years, I would learn what notes and books and teaching felt like and what it would be to lose it. They all, as far as I know, got back to their lives and went on teaching and doing what they were supposed to do. And I got to thinking about that when it stirred in my memory this week, about all the disasters that my life has crossed over through the years. Some of them are natural disasters like that, what are called by insurance people acts of providence. I think that's the worst theological term ever. Others, though, were man-made, murders and car wrecks and embezzling and betrayals of every kind you can imagine. Drugs, property crimes, the garden varieties of human failings that are part of ministries. They are personal disasters, family disasters, but not the kind that I'm thinking about here. I'm thinking about the ones that overarch a whole community or a whole nation or a whole world. Those big ones were more like that fire. They burn up everything in their walls and lifetimes go up in smoke. Careers are destroyed and people's hopes and hard work are just snuffed out. They're much bigger than individual sins. They take down other people, not just a few. Race has been one of those in my ministry. It was most intense in my community in South Georgia in a series of crises, but I'd have to say that that's been a fire that's been burning through every church and my entire 41 years of ministry, and it's still burning. Every now and then it explodes back into view again and threatens the whole of our human world. Large corporate scandals and financial crises can be like that. Suddenly people's lifetime of work evaporates. It's gone, often by the machinations of a single arrogant person driven by egotistical hubris or greed, and suddenly people's lives are ruined and their hopes and disappointments are crystallized, and retirements they had planned on are gone. Reputations are ruined by association. Religious fights are another one. My ministry began faithfully in 1979, the year a federal judge and a pastor from Arkansas plotted to take over the Southern Baptist Convention and drive it into the ditch on the right side of the political road. And that one still lingers today, causing all kinds of damage. Hundreds of people lost jobs and were fired and driven out of seminaries and colleges. And along the way, evangelicals and fundamentalists who had parted ways back in the time of Billy Graham as evangelicals sought to create a more intellectually respectable Christianity that could appeal to a broader band of culture. But during the 80s, in the early part of my ministry, they came back together under the political work of Jerry Falwell Sr., and they began the long, slow process of somehow politically being one group instead of two. And so the culture wars that James Davison Hunter would name them have been a fire that we haven't extinguished yet. In every congregation, sits over a powder keg of issues that could blow it to pieces with the wrong conversation. I think too about conflicts that happen broadly across churches, like worship conflicts. It was a fire. It was a house of fire when I came here over that issue. About that time, churches were lit up over how you worship and what music their children would like enough to stay in the church that their parents grew up in. It split a lot of congregations. And like other old structures, had been around long enough that once the spark was lit, the whole structure exploded. And there are lots of other things that are like this. In my time here, we've gone through a tornado and some recessions and now a pandemic. But here's the thing. When a fire burns a house down, you've really only got a couple of choices. You can either pull together and decide, if we're going to hold together, we've got to clean this up and rebuild the best that we can. Or sometimes the damage is total and you just don't have the heart to start over, and you give up and move on somewhere else. But if you can summon the strength and the family can stay together, you can find a way to still carry out the mission and plan something bigger than the tragedy. Those teachers of mine marked my life forever. The fire didn't have much to do with that. By the next year at Carson Newman, we students weren't thinking about the fire anymore, although I'm sure the professors and the administrators were for a long time. Eventually, a beautiful new building was built, and it looked very much like the one it had replaced, and it turned out that the one that had burned actually was the second building that had burned. The first one burned in 1919. But this new one would have air conditioning and modern electricity and modern fixtures and floors that no longer creaked and wobbled, and no brown places where the leaks had come through the roof into the ceilings overhead. It was a great place. You know, the great thing about people who are really educated is that they carry the content of their education in themselves, not just a folder or a book. They've really read the books and they've engaged the ideas and they quote them from memory and they wrestle with the ideas. I got a first-rate education, and so did Vicki. And on that day in 1976, when Vicki and I, now 21, walked across the platform and we got our diplomas and a greeting from our president, we were different people. Now, sometime after I came here in 1993, the former president of Carson Newman at the time that I was there, Dr. John Fincher, and his delightful wife, Ruby, moved here. They were from Alabama, and John had taught at Samford for a long time, and they settled just up the street here from Shades Crest Road, and I went to visit with them, and in the great irony that life sometimes brings, I had the joy and privilege of now being the pastor to the man who had presided over my education and my graduation ceremony. And I would be their pastor until the ends of both of their lives. They were wonderful members of the Shalom Sunday School class, and that class at its peak had 56 members in it, and I remember some wonderful parties and fun times that we had when they were at their peak. We laughed together a lot of times through the years. I especially like the one when Dr. John and Ruby told me about the days that his hand was forced by the trustees to go to the Tennessee Baptist Convention and try to get them to change the rules so we could have dancing on campus after the students had sort of pressured him to do that. And as Ruby told me about that, of course, it was a disaster. The preachers got all worked up. They were always trying to head off Eros and human nature wherever they could. And Ruby would say, "Oh, you can't believe how mean some of those preachers were to Finch at that meeting." "Oh, yes, I would," I say. "I've been around preachers. I know how they can be." But we also had memory of that fire, and what a terrible night that was for everyone. It felt like the end of the world. No, it wasn't. Life went on. School resumed. We rebuilt. We got on with it. Every time something like that fire happens, I can remember all those feelings again. Helplessness, sadness, anger. the whole gamut. Human-made catastrophes can do that, and so can the natural ones. This past year has felt a little like that time. Race, religious craziness, a pandemic, and the nightmare of the post-election disaster and the riot at the Capitol. For a little while, here and there, it's felt like the whole building was going to collapse and the country we live in itself was going to burn to the ground by what turned out to be a lot of misinformation fueled by the arsonists of reason and truth who hid their work from our view. For a while, it seemed like nothing was ever going to be the same again. But all those years later, by the grace of God and the leadership of Dr. Fincher and the faculty who stared at what had to seem like the end of their world that night, they went on and continued to believe and trust in God. And because of them, I was able to continue following the vocation that they helped me to develop. Institutions can't really be Christian in the strictest sense, nor corporations or businesses or even nations. That's kind of a myth. But things can be inhabited by people who are Christian and have a faith in God that enables them to utilize it for God. Memories do shape us. And as I leave here from my ministry, I leave here with lots of memories. And there are memories of tornadoes and hurricanes, the church split and recovery. But I also leave with plenty of memories of ministry that didn't work and ideas that didn't pan out or budgets that we didn't quite reach. People who left the church or ministry that didn't quite accomplish what we hoped with someone. And sometimes that was even painful. But that isn't really the point, because along with that, I have 10 times as many memories of people acting with devotion and integrity, with marriages that overcame, children that came around eventually. I have memories of faithful Sunday school teachers and mission leaders and people who taught children and youth and people who were leaders in the toughest of times. Faith in the Lord means, at the very least, keeping on as things change around us. Sometimes it's dramatic, like a fire or an earthquake or a great wind. Sometimes it's just a tiny whisper in your heart that says, what are you doing here? Keep moving. Faith in the process doesn't mean absolute faith in what you know. It can change along the way and you have to change direction with it, but you trust in the God who is guiding and has the outcome, and you trust each other and you stay together. And you believe that one day a president of a university who barely knew that a 19-year-old student standing there in the yard watching the building burn with him would one day know enough to be his pastor to the end of his days. And that, I believe, is greater than the fires or failures or personal disasters of any kind. When we keep on getting up, we keep moving on, we keep looking ahead, because God is on the journey, come what may. Faith in God isn't faith in our perfect following of things. A faith in God is a faith beyond the fires, beyond the disappointing people that let you down every now and then, and even beyond the disappointment you inevitably have with yourself. It is trusting in God as the reality that is beyond everything that scares us or discourages us or knocks us down. And even when in the night the whole world looks like it is on fire, it is good to remember to trust in the process, to trust in each other, and most of all, to trust in the Lord. I look forward to seeing more of you on Sunday. It was such a great time last Sunday to see a number of faces for the first time in a long, long time. And it's been joyful. And as we continue in this time of looking back and counting blessings and giving thanks, I look forward to seeing many of you on Sunday morning and in the Sundays ahead in our final time here.